Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second webinar in our cybersecurity series. Our webinar today focuses on cybersecurity controls made simple and provides a roadmap for small to mid-sized businesses who are implementing control group IG1. We focus on Texas small to mid-sized businesses with 20 to 99 employees today. We're seeking to implement these control groups to take advantage of the safe harbor protections that have been afforded by the new Senate Bill 2610. I'm joined today by our co-sponsor, Whitley Penn, and two esteemed members of their cybersecurity practice, John Williamson and Jesus Vega. John Williamson is a seasoned risk advisory professional specializing in operational and technology risk, SOC 1, 2, and 3 reporting, CIS Top 18 implementation, SOX consulting, internal audit, and IT compliance. He collaborates with senior leadership to align risk management with strategic goals, optimize business processes, and support governance initiatives. Jesus Vega is a cybersecurity leader with over 18 years of experience in IT, specializing in compliance, risk management, and enterprise risk strategies. As CISSP, he aligns security operations with business risk appetite to build effective compliance programs. Jesus has led cross-functional teams to mitigate threats in complex environments and is a trusted advisor to executive leadership. He's also a frequent speaker on cloud security, governance, and the evolving digital threat landscape. We're excited to have them join us today as subject matter experts. They're instrumental to the work that I perform as a cybersecurity lawyer. In my experience, tech, legal, and executive teams often pull in different directions. They sometimes even seem to speak completely different languages. In my role as a cybersecurity lawyer, I serve as a bridge between those worlds. I help boards and executive leadership and IT experts align compliance with company goals, budgets, and the day-to-day realities of running a small to mid-sized business in Texas. Cyber incidents and compliance failures almost always carry legal, regulatory, and even reputational risks. When an attorney leads or is embedded in the process, the communications, the findings, and the remediation plans developed under their direction are typically protected by attorney-client privilege or the work product doctrine. This privilege allows a company to investigate honestly, to fix problems quickly, and to speak openly without creating the risk of new liability. Because legal liability and compliance have recently been brought to the forefront with the conversation surrounding the passing of Texas Senate Bill 2610. What is Senate Bill 2610? Well, it's the legislature's response to the increasing number of cybersecurity incidents that are prevalent throughout our state and our nation. Legislatures want to see Texas businesses take reasonable steps to preserve the security of their electronic environments. SB 2610, or Senate Bill 2610, became effective September 1st, and it provides this safe harbor or protected area from punitive damages. What are punitive damages? Well, there are extra monetary penalties that a court can impose to punish a company for perceived gross negligence, fraud, or willful disregard of known and understood risks. Punitive damages aren't intended to compensate victims, which is typically what the law tries to do, but rather they're designed to deter future misconduct. In cybersecurity cases, they're awarded to effective claimants when a business knew what basic protections were needed. Think of multi-factor authentication or data backups, but chose not to implement them. To avoid these damages, under Senate Bill 2610, the language of the statute tells us that for employers between 20 and 99 employees, they have to meet these moderate requirements. These moderate requirements they define as including the requirements of CIS Implementation Group 1. And that's the first part of the equation. The second part of the equation is that the business must also be able to demonstrate that it had these controls in place when the breach occurred to claim the benefit of these safe harbor protections. In a very real way, what Senate Bill 2610 does is it creates the objective standard of due care. If it's not upheld, this standard of care will open the door to litigation of a business's liability for perceived negligence or even gross negligence. In a very real way, it defines whether or not the business's controls were reasonable utilizing this objective standard. Now, while it's true that the other cybersecurity frameworks do exist, and adopting one of the higher order national cybersecurity standards, such as the NIST cybersecurity framework, or the ISO 27000 series, would satisfy the standard imposed by the legislature, the CIS controls are generally easier to implement, and they're provided online with additional support tools that are made available to you at no cost. And don't worry, we've got you there. A link to these resources are going to be included in the handouts that you can go and gather them yourself. It's important to note, however, that certain businesses subject to other pre-existing regulatory frameworks in areas such as healthcare, government contracting, and finance will need to work within and outside of the CIS controls to account for these additional requirements. Thankfully, the CIS controls do provide a very firm basis on which to build these additional regulatory considerations and protections. But the takeaway, the thing that I want to leave with everyone who's attending today, is that adoption is the key to avoiding litigation altogether. What both practice of the law and cybersecurity best practices have taught me is that prevention is always far less costly than a cure. And preventing a cybersecurity breach focuses on two related but distinct areas. Those areas, which are the focus of today's topic of conversation, are controls and compliance. Controls are the starting point. For small to medium-sized businesses in Texas with 20 to 99 employees, CIS Control Group 1 provides a basic roadmap for the journey to compliance by starting with checklists that promote effective, high-impact initiatives as early as possible. But compliance, on the other hand, results when your people live the policies that you've created. And this compliance can be demonstrated by the documentation that you and your professionals have created and developed along the path. The trick is you want to make it as easy as possible for a regulator or a litigator to understand that punitive damages shouldn't even become part of the conversation, just without the bounds of reason. If you are able to create and maintain a security-minded culture, you have to be able to demonstrate that the technology and people in your organization have adopted your policies and are using your technologies with security in mind. In this way, employee buy-in is absolutely critical. What implementers such as myself and John and Jesus want to avoid at all costs is the danger of shelfware. Shelfware results when you have a policy, you've expended the time, energy, and effort to create it, but you've lost track of it, and it ends up collecting dust on a shelf in someone's office somewhere, forgotten. This result helps absolutely no one. All that shelfware does is it shows that you knew what was required, but didn't live up to the standards you at least partially set for yourself. This effectively undoes all the benefits that we're trying to create to protect our clients. We do everything in our power to avoid the result of having invested the time, money, and energy on a document that puts you right back to square one, where you're facing legal liability and potentially punitive damages. To avoid this shelfware problem, it's important to understand that good cybersecurity habits don't require a deep bench of technical knowledge. What we typically want from an organization, what we require as implementers, is we need one person, one champion in the organization who has a baseline level of interest in cybersecurity and is willing to learn and teach others to pass on the fundamental concepts that they're learning themselves. Because the process of changing culture it's not immediate. And having that key individual who is keeping up and maintaining their knowledge base allows your organization to effectively utilize external resources, such as Whitley Penn or Shields Legal Group, to grow your internal knowledge base. And that's where the results are really seen. The best results come from working with partners like Shields Legal Group and Whitley Penn to provide technical solutions that your employees can grasp, understand, and work with, because we've taken the extra step of removing the jargon from the discussion. This enhances actual understanding of cybersecurity fundamentals. And again, you don't have to be a highly technical or experienced cybersecurity person. You just have to find someone in your organization where you can where you can encourage that interest and turn that spark into something that can catch fire in the rest of your organizations. Because if you're asking an employee to take an extra step, to put security in your culture first, if you're asking them to take the additional step of using multi-factor authentication, right? It's taking another, it's implementing another step into an already somewhat mundane task, like using multi-factor authentication. You have to explain the why in order to engender the type of results that you want to see. The additional and involving your employees, no matter how small that step may be, is often the difference maker that prevents attackers from potentially ransoming your entire network. Because the true benefits, both legal and business, of adopting a cybersecurity and security-minded mindset are both tangible and intangible. To the business, you obviously see fewer incidents. You see your culture start to develop, and you go through audits more smoothly and efficiently than you otherwise would. Your legal department and risk management teams are feeling great because you've taken good faith steps to comply with the requirements, and you can reduce your liabilities and damages in litigation. Obviously, that's the worst case scenario that we're trying to avoid, but it's always within the realm of possibility. Because when you face litigation, or if you face an investigation from regulators, the first question that they're going to ask is, did you walk the talk, or did you just draft the policies and let them become shelfware? What I've noticed through implementing these policies and creating these cultures is that there's this subtle point in the adoption process that's easy to miss when I start to see the culture subtly shift. It's very subtle at first. I start noticing one or two employees who begin to lock their computers when they step away from their desks. I've never seen that before. I've also witnessed a new employee hovering over and reporting a suspicious link in an email with much greater frequency because they took the time to understand the training. You can work with your IT providers and external resources to make that process as easy and painless for your employees. The standard here is effectively a 3 or 4 click process to report potentially phishing or malware infected emails, because the easier you make this process for your employees, the easier it will be for you to measure results and get clarity on what's effective in your company. In implementing across companies large and small, I found that no two companies are the same. They have different challenges, different employee personalities, and there are multiple paths to these measurable and successful outcomes. And selecting the right path is often informed by the culture that we're already presented with, the minds and the people who are involved in the organization. And we try to measure these benefits wherever possible, but metrics only go so far. There are some measures of success that are more difficult to quantify. But make no mistake, when one of your coworkers or employees successfully reports a malicious link, one that could have brought your company to its knees, you are reaping the true rewards of having a cybersecurity-minded culture. When I see a quarantine piece of malware or a successfully reported phishing email, these are the greatest victories that I think your organization could possibly ask for, and they should be absolutely celebrated. Each one of these demonstrates that you're on the path, that you're well on your journey to success, because these policies are proving effective when they matter most. But every journey begins with a first step. And I'd like to hand the floor over to Whitley Penn, to John and Jesus, who will provide a starting point for your CIS journey and implementation and an overview of how to adopt the CIS control group number 1.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Really appreciate the invitation to be here. So Jesus and I are going to walk through some of the more technical aspects of how to implement the controls within the CIS Top 18 framework. We're also going to explain conceptually kind of what the framework is and hopefully give you some practical tools and steps to implement some of these technical safeguards to take advantage of SB 2610 and the safe harbor provisions therein. Just to give you a brief overview, for those of you that don't know Whitley Penn, we are a public accounting firm, a CPA firm, number 35 in the nation in terms of revenue, but we're most geographically associated with the state of Texas, so we're all throughout the major markets within Texas. So just like any CPA firm, our practice focuses on audit, tax, and advisory. And I'll just focus on advisory because Jesus and I are both in the advisory practice. I'm the partner in charge of our risk advisory practice. Jesus is responsible for our cybersecurity practice. He and I have been partnering for years with our clients on implementing cybersecurity best practices, information security risk management frameworks, and control frameworks. And so we've been able to work with our clients to scale this from tiny enterprises to huge multinational ones. So my hope is that we can take our experience and then tailor that to you to give you some takeaways to take advantage of some of these risk management strategies for your organization. So I'm going to hand things off to Jesus, who's going to walk us through some of these slides, and I'll be here to comment as we go. Jesus?
Thank you, John. John was very kind with his words, but that was a very fancy way of saying I'm an IT nerd. I've been doing IT implementations for about 20 years, and I really enjoyed going to companies that are endeavoring for the first time on implementing compliance and governance programs. I know people look at me and think that I'm, off my meds or something when I say that, but to me, it's an enjoyable process. Now, if you guys are here, you're probably thinking about or starting a process of implementing cybersecurity. But let's start with the basics. Why, for a small company or mid-sized company, is this important? Well, the first item that I need you to consider is that SMBs are prime targets for bad guys. They know that the companies have limited resources, that they have but probably not an in-house expert that can address cybersecurity risk, governance or compliance questions. So they know that's a soft target for them, and bad guys are lazy. They go after the easy targets. So our goal here is to make sure that anybody who's endeavoring this process is not a soft target. Now, we don't have to have a lot of deep pockets to put a lot of these controls in place. We need to have just the intention and the will to go forth. It's not a hard process, but it's also not something that is going to take a lot of resources. For that, for the understanding that we have of the clients and their environments, we focus on how to approach this to the leadership. Well, let's start with the main concern of SMBs, driving business. Cybersecurity is a business driver. Now, I know that the first thing that comes to mind from CFOs and controllers is IT is expensive. They cost money. Yes, they do. However, they also drive business. Example, how many of you guys have received questionnaires from your potential new clients to say, we want to do business with you. Here's a 20-page questionnaire that you need to fill out. Do you have, and then there's a laundry list of things that are all cybersecurity related. When you have a cybersecurity framework in place, you can return your report of that framework in place and say, here's my list of me having somebody else verify this is already in place. So I'm not going to do your 20-page questionnaire here. So that helps drive a lot of business. Guys, none of our clients come to us and say, I'm bored. I want to get audited by you guys. Help us go through a risk assessment. They come to us because that's typically the driver. New potential clients asking for that. Now, understanding the role of a service provider relationship with a small business, it's almost a 100% of the times, the small companies will depend on a third party to obtain those services because it's a cost practice, right? You have a service provider or service security provider. They can start small. They can start with just maintaining, your environment, but then as the business gets bigger, they can help you migrate from those couple servers in the server room over to cloud architecture and be more robust. So service providers are very scalable. They grow with you. And they have the expertise in house. The reality is that most likely you won't have the budget or the want to bring somebody who's going to cost X amount of dollars as a sole IT engineer or security architect to help with those. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
So as we start this process, how are we going to endeavor to go into the CIS controls? Now, as Sasha said earlier, the CIS is a great starting point. You can use that as a stepping stone for other platforms as your business drives into PCI or HIPAA or insert flavor framework here, but those are a good starting point. Now, to start, you have to prioritize a roadmap, best practices. Sasha mentioned something that kind of he hit the nail in the head. When people start taking this seriously, it's on all of us needs to start addressing cybersecurity as a whole, not just the service provider, not just the IT folks. We want to make sure that this framework that gets put into place is best practices for the organization. As Sasha mentioned before, people, when they start taking this as all of us, make the organization secure. Training, email security, those are some of the items we're going to discuss in a couple of slides later. But as a culture, as a company, we can start being custodians of our data and have in mind that bad guys are after it. Again, it's a low-hanging fruit for them because they see, oh, it's an SMB, we're going to go after them. But what they're not going to realize is if regardless of the size of the company, if we have a good mindset to protect our data, not necessarily cybersecurity, just protecting ourselves, then we're not a soft target.
Yeah, sorry, Jesus. You might want to add to, again, I know we're going to go through the CIS framework and the implementation groups. I just want to, I guess, take a moment to say, I really, I think, kind of admire and respect what Texas state legislators have done. Very frequently over the past years, regulators have grappled with how to incentivize and promote cybersecurity best practices throughout the public at large, particularly commercial enterprises. And so they've historically done this through regulation, through levying fines whenever companies mess up. What they've done is they've kind of taken this on its head, and then they've provided more of a carrot instead of a stick, which is in the event that you do what you should and have a good faith effort to implement these controls and practices, then we're going to allow you certain safe harbor to minimize your cost in the event that something bad does occur. Now, again, Jesus, I know you're about to walk through this, but what I particularly like about their selection and promotion of the CIS Top 18 is it takes a lot of security principles and then boils it down to very digestible information. Again, Sasha mentioned NIST, CSF, HIPAA, a number of different frameworks out there. And again, there are a lot of flavors out there, frameworks, but some of those frameworks include hundreds or thousands of control requirements. Well, what CIS has done is take those principles and then tried to summarize those into 18 principles. And then again, Jesus, I know I'm preempting you a little bit because we're going to walk through implementation groups and kind of what this looks like. But I just want to, we're going to go through this. I just want to caution you. Some of it may look a little daunting, but we're going to try to present this to you in a way that's very manageable and understandable that you can take and then implement at your enterprise.
Yeah, thank you for that, John. The legislature is always trying to find a balance, and I think you're right that this approach where effectively it's you get the carrot if you do the work sets a really good tone in terms of litigation because regulatory fines are often arbitrary. We've seen some fines that are small enough that it becomes a cost of doing business, but kind of removing this from a a clear cut, you will be fined X amount of dollars certainly adds some teeth and also adds some reason to kind of go for the carrot.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And speaking up to what we were discussing, this is a very scalable framework. Here's how I look at this. If this can be implemented at your organization, and later on you realize that you have another governing body on top of your organization, let's say credit cards processing, so PCI, or you're dealing with medical records, so HIPAA security rule. This is very flexible, and you could be able to pivot really quickly with this foundation. You don't have to pull it out and bring something new. So this is why I believe the Texas legislation chose this one, because it's very robust. It's a great standing stone. The framework itself focuses on risk reduction. It talks about the different areas we're going to go into the next slide, but it talks about how are we going to safeguard our data and our business. The whole focus is to making the business more secure, which is the IG1 suite that we're going to have on our next slide, please. Now,
Daunting list.
The IG1 is, if you look at this slide, if you look at the screen, it has category or controls number 1 through 18, and then on the bottom of that, it has a couple color coding. One is IG1 is green, IG2 is orange, and blue is IG3. Those are the tiers, right? The more mature the company, the different tiers you can implement. For our purposes, for SMBs and what the state legislation discussed, we're focusing just on IG1. You'll notice that it has focusing on control 1 as an example, just because I'm not going to go through every single one. The framework has 5 sub-controls or 5 safeguards. That's the language that they use. And for IG1, you only require to implement 2. We can spend a whole hour going through these different controls, which we're not going to do this. We're not going to turn this into a technical session. I will just give you a mile-high overview of the categories that we're expected to implement as IG1. I'm going to group 1 and 2 as inventory. Just know what you have in your environment, software and hardware. Data protection, as it explains, is just your data, your secret sauce, your intellectual property. Those are the files and documents that you want to have secure in your environment. Give you a quick example. Your laptop, is this something that's encrypted? I'll give you a very example, a scenario that happened to us with Lipen. We ensure that all laptops are encrypted. Last year, there was an incident where somebody had their laptop stolen out of their car. I remember the IT folks were really nervous. They're like, oh no, we had a stolen laptop. Well, what do we need to do? The IT manager said, let's look at the asset. Okay, here's our inventory list. Here's the associated name of that person. Is the computer encrypted? Yes. Oh, okay. So we have a asset lost, not data loss, because we're able to confirm that the data was protected in that asset. So, of course, the peers of this person got, they harassed them and they gave them a hard time. But there was really no harm to the organization except for the computer being lost. And of course, the window of that person's car. But from the company perspective, we didn't have loss of data thanks to data protection. Secure configuration of your assets and software, kind of self-explanatory, but think about it this way. If I'm going to use myself as an example, my dad bought a new computer recently. And he's like, I brought it out of the store. It's ready to go. I'm like, it's not. It's not configured correctly. My dad is a very smart person, but when it comes to technology, I wouldn't use that smart adjective. But if he's not there, he's not here to hear me. If he were, he would slap me. But it comes to the same analogy to when you go into your environment for work. If you have computers that are not running the same, you don't have a configuration that's standard across the board. And this is simple stuff, right? Make sure that every computer has an administrator password that is known to your IT guys. So if that person is on vacation or you need to retrieve a file, or whatever may be the case, you can get into the computer. You have some sort of protection of the data, like I mentioned earlier. Full disk encryption is a good example. It has the protection tools that you need as a minimum, which is listed in a separate section here, or like antivirus. Those are the configurations. So every computer looks the same, every computer acts the same, and every computer is protected the same. So that would be your configuration. Account management is very fancy for onboarding and deboarding permissions. You guys hire me, you give me my credentials, you guys know what level of access I'm getting. I don't take showers, I smell bad, you fire me because I smell bad in the office. Removing logical access, picking up a badge so I can come back and stink up the place. Those would be the account management controls. They also tie in with access control management. So the names are simple. Number 7 gets a little bit trickier because this is vulnerability management. This is a little bit of a technical risk assessment that you have to perform in your environment. Now, the simplest way to do this is to make sure that all your Windows patches are being installed, that your Adobe patches are being installed, your Chrome patches are being installed. Why? Because those are the 3 culprits of most of the software attack venues that we have out there: Chrome, Adobe, and Windows. And let's face it, we cannot live without those 3 tools. Audit log management, I'm not going to say that I disagree that this is an IG1 level, but this is something that's important to have. I think we need to have some accountability, and think about it this way. From your accounting solution, let's say you have something like QuickBooks. You want to be able to go in there and see who cut a check to who, right? You have some sort of logs. So we want to make sure we have some sort of a traceability. Email protection, self-explanatory. Spam is a way for bad guys to ask you to open the door for them. So have something to protect. Malware defense and network infrastructure management are more technical, typically service providers, but as I mentioned earlier, it's more on the antivirus and network infrastructure. It's just protecting, having your firewalls and technical information. But here's a really important one. If you guys are going to tune out and go get lunch or something, before you do, pay attention to this one: data recovery. That is the most important one on this list. I think that should be the first one, to be honest with you guys, because a lot of the situations, if you ever get breached, the data recovery is what's going to help you. And I have a really personal example to share with you guys. Last year, my dad had his computer attacked by ransomware. My dad's a standard user. He uses his computer at home for the same thing we always do. Facebook, going to accounts, paying bills, that kind of stuff. He had his computer, got an email from a friend, or he thought it was from a friend. He clicked on it, and it was a link that he didn't know what it was, but he clicked on the link, and his computer got encrypted by ransomware. He called me. He's like, my computer is acting really wonky. I don't know what's going on. It's asking for me to call some number and for me to pay for a tool. And I'm like, don't do anything. Just unplug it. And, literally just turn it off, unplug it, disconnect. He's like, okay. A couple days later, I went to sit down with him. I was like, what's going on? It's like, I got this. Like, what was the link supposed to say? It was like free movies. I was like, oh my God. Anyway, he clicked on it. At this point, I can't say anything. But in a previous visit to his house, I had set him up with Microsoft OneDrive, a recovery option that Microsoft has for him to back up his pictures, his My Documents, everything that was critical to him. So I told him, well, at this point, I'm not going to mess with it. We're just going to reinstall the operating system. All the data on this computer is lost. Once we got the operating system back up and running, the data recovery option that we implemented a few months earlier saved everything. Same principle for your business. If you get ransomware and you have robust backups, then you'll be able to recover your data.
And I think just to add on to that, Jesus, having been involved in ransomware negotiations many times, what that looks like at an enterprise level is you're looking at the cost of recovering your data, and you're really weighing it against the ransom demand. And as I'm trying to chunk down the demanded sum from the threat actors, I'm working with IT to scope out how much it's going to cost to rebuild any lost data. And having no data loss or having protected data really upends that process and provides a lot more leverage for my affected clients.
Yeah, definitely. Looking at the other components, I'm not going to go through each other one because they're kind of self-explanatory, except for 14. security awareness and skill training. Sasha mentioned this at the beginning of the call. I'll repeat this. This is the most important one you guys can do. You can have millions of dollars of technology protecting your environment. It just takes one person to click on something they're not supposed to, and then your all that security, it's basically out the window. So training. If you notice, IG1 has 8 out of 9 safeguards in place for IG1. There's plenty of options for training, from having somebody help do a presentation in front of the organization, similar to this event, to online solutions like KnowBe4 and Proofpoint and Microsoft. And there's 20 different options that are cost effective. So it's just a matter of taking that step. Can we go to the next slide?
Hey, and Jesus, just one thing I wanted to point out. Again, I know it's a lot of content in there, but for those of you that pull up the framework, just for implementation group 1, I think you'll notice that there are actually 3 controls that have 0 safeguards for implementation group 1. So you can take those 18, and then just for the safe harbor provision of SB 2610, almost think of those as the top 15 controls. And then you can go through the safeguards underneath those to ensure that you're compliant with that particular framework.
Thank you, John. That's a great segue to this slide. That was a lot of information that we just went through in a couple of minutes. How does that apply to you guys, especially if you're starting this? Does that mean you have to spend the next 6 months implementing this? No. What it does suggest is we focus on group implementation of the framework. The first thing is, and I broke this down into 4 categories, and this is based on the experience that we mentioned earlier, that we help companies build this, and this is what we found is the easiest approach, the most digestible for those companies that are limited in resources, limited in staff, and have a service provider. Asset and access management. I jokingly said, you guys fire me and terminate me, but we do have to have a robust process for onboarding and deboarding personnel. When we have a new hire or termination, there's a couple of things that we need to do. Get access set up appropriately. Make sure that the access that is granted for that person is appropriate for their needs to the business. So role-based access control, and they need to know, right? Would I like to know how much every single partner in our firm makes? Well, yeah, I'm nosy. I'm very, I was born that way. But
think like a threat actor, Jesus.
Exactly. But do I need to know those financial records of from our different partners? No, I have no need for that. So I don't need to have access to that. And that mentality has to be implemented across the board, right? What does this role require access to? Does it need to know about this? Hardware and software. The hardware's an easy one. What do we have in an environment? When is it coming up for end of life? Do we need to replace any hardware, any software, license management? The configuration is a little bit more tricky because it's more of working with your service provider, making sure that they configure correctly. And then upon termination, they will recall those licenses and will recall that access. So once you get that access management and asset management lumped in together, you have like half of the framework already in place. The next big group is protection and prevention. This is something you'll definitely have to work with your service provider hand in hand, because this is more on the technical side. Vulnerability management, like I said earlier, is patch management. It's making sure that you don't have anything that is related to missing patches, misconfiguration, something that would open a window for bad guys. Not necessarily the door, but just have an open window where bad guys can get into your environment. Protecting against external threats like bad emails, bad websites, like my dad's instance of him getting through his email. And then just keeping your browsers protected. So protection and prevention, updating, patching, that's all you guys need to do now. And detection and response. You can have all these tools. You can go and buy all top shelf tools, but at the end of the day, if we don't have a robust incident response plan, how are we going to react? How are we going to address? If a computer goes down, it's an issue that affects one person. If 20 people go down, then it's more of a critical severity project. At that point, do you run around with your hair on fire? Obviously, that wouldn't apply to me, but would that be an instance that your organization is ready to deal with, or it would be a moment of panic or a moment of like, okay, this is bad. Let's look at the plan. What do we do? Call the service provider, and then have a procedure in place to address identifying the severity, what is being impacted. Those are hard to put together, but if you work with your service provider, it's not an impossible task. It's just some effort to put together.
And having
And
the luxury of time to do that ahead of a breach is paramount. When you're, as someone who steps in to respond to incidents and manage them, doing this on the fly, it makes things far more complicated, and it does slow down the response time because you're figuring out in real time what resources you have while the house is on fire.
yeah, definitely. And then the last section, and the interest of time, I'm going to start speeding up a little bit, is governance and continuous improvement. Translation, this is helping the organizations make informed decisions when it comes to your risk, cybersecurity risk debt. It reduces the financial cost of operating because you have your tools in place, and you have a expected cost. You don't have to react and bring additional tools when you have a breach. And then most importantly, if you have governance and compliance oversight, you'll be able to say you're meeting those regulatory bodies. Can we go to the next slide? So this, fortunately for us, these slides already touch on it, so I'm gonna just kind of rehash them. How do we implement these? You have to work with your service provider. You have to do what's best for the organization. You cannot tackle this all at one time. Somebody said to me once, when you see a big project, think about it as a big Thanksgiving dinner. You're gonna get through it at one bite at a time. And this is exactly what we need to do. We start with the easy victories. We don't have a security awareness training. Let's do that one. We don't want to get an online tool. Let's get somebody to come over and do a 1 hour session for the company. Or let's get a tool that keeps, like a know before, if you will. Talk to your service provider and say, what do we have in place that we're not using? We're contracted with you guys. We have antivirus, yes. We have tickets, yes. We have change management. What is change management? Oh, when we do changes to the environment, patching and all that. Well, we just do it nilly-willy. Well, no, let's get more formal on this. But let's make sure we don't impact the business, because the last thing we want to do is get a process of doing X, Y, and Z related to updating infrastructure or malware or whatnot, but then limiting the capacity for the business to operate. So,
yeah. And Jesus, one thing I particularly like about this framework and the concept is it's a risk-based framework. And so one thing that we often advise our clients on is, it's the same concept. It's follow the money. In cybersecurity, it's often follow the data. And so data mapping and data classification is a big part of this. And once you understand where your sensitive data is and what assets have that data, then you can take a more targeted, precise, and cost-effective approach to protecting yourself. Now, one thing and we wanted to highlight here, given our target audience, most everyone works with a managed service provider in some capacity, I would expect. So I guess on the next two slides, Jesus, would you mind walking us through some best practices based on your experience on how to interact with service providers?
Yes. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So collaboration with the service providers is really important. Okay. If anybody in this room has a service provider and they're the point of contact with them, you'll know that when it comes to talking about hardware and licensing, that's easy peasy, right? Hey, we need 2 new laptops. We hire 2 people. Great, done. Send me the invoice. We got it done. But then we start talking to the service provider about the upcoming patch management or the server upgrade, and they start going into this technical jargon. IT people are my people, but we're total IT nerds. I've been in situations where I have to translate between the service provider and to the business. Clear roles and definitions is really important. We need to have somebody who can speak both languages, business and IT. That is a critical component of having a successful relationship, because if we have an office manager, a controller, a CFO as a point of contact with the service provider, I know the CFO, controller, and office managers are very smart people, but I've been told by them that when IT talks to them, they go just like, they're talking, but I don't hear anything. So we need to have somebody who advocates for the business to the service provider, because the service provider is a business, and I'm not knocking on them. I know a lot of service providers that I think they're wonderful companies, great people. But at the end of the day, if they don't have to do additional work, they might not do it unless the company pushes for it. So collaboration is important. We want to make sure that we have ongoing meetings. We have somebody in the business side of the house that can speak with the IT providers in a concise manner, that there's clear understanding of what's going on, what's happening, project management, understanding their compliance requirements, and then just having this clear goal forward. What is our end game for what we're trying to do? Can we go over to the next slide? I'll conclude here. As I mentioned several times, this is a business need, right? We need to prioritize our cybersecurity protection for driving additional business, not just for protecting ourselves. That's a big part of it. But the reality is that these frameworks that are out there help you to get more business. There's been countless times that we've been asked for the security questionnaire. I don't know how to answer to half of these questions. The other half, we don't have them in place, and I don't want to lose this big contract. This will make us go from a small size company to a mid-sized company. Mm-hmm. And these frameworks are easy to implement if you start now. The most important thing you want to do is, for your service provider, sit down with them and say, how can we work on improving our security? Let's have achievable goals. We don't have to go anything crazy. Let's just say, here's where we're at right now. Let's shoot for our goal of implementing the CIS top 15 or top 10 in the next 6 months. And then we finish the other 5, and then we start driving on those. I can spend an hour talking about best practices, but I think we're ready to go to our next slide on key takeaways. As I mentioned several times, it's important for the business. This is critical for business development. It's protecting our data, protecting our assets. Collaboration. I mean, it won't work if you guys don't sit down with your service providers and have ongoing communications. I can spend a little bit of time here, but we're short on time. When I've seen service providers and companies that pay those service providers not talk to each other. They're like the worst parents, not talking to each other. They're like, yeah, we're in the same room, but we're just going to acknowledge ourselves, except at the end of the month when the invoice goes out. So it's a sad situation to see that, because neither the service provider nor the company are getting value from each other.
Very true.
And
yeah,
I'm sorry, Sasha. Yeah, I just wanted to say, hey, so this is essentially what we wanted to communicate regarding implementation. I know you're going to walk us through some common pitfalls, so I just want to hand things back to you, and then we'll be available to provide commentary as needed.
Great, thank you, John. Yeah, because we've, as implementers, we've discussed offline some of the common stumbling blocks and pitfalls that many small businesses experience along the path of implementation through adoption. I've selected a few from our discussion, and we seem to identify 2 real critical areas at issue. At the initial planning stage, call that the implementation stage, as well as sort of developed complacency that results in this shelfware. How common are these issues in your experience, and would you care to share any examples without giving any clues that will identify the business at hand?
Yeah, I can.
Go ahead, John.
I'll start quickly, and then I know, Jesus, you probably have more interesting stories than I do. One of our core competencies is really audit. I mean, many times as we go and implement these frameworks, we're also being asked to audit it at some point in the future. And it is amazing the number of times you'll interact with the client and say, do you have this in place? And the answer is always yes, and they'll refer you to a policy document. And then you say, okay, now can you prove it? Can you give me any kind of auditable evidence or anything that documents the fact that you've done it? And then we tend to get a deer in the headlights look. Yep. I would just caution everyone, again, policies are great. It's a great starting point, but just make sure that we've truly implemented this and we are documenting along the way. And then if you want to take advantage of these safe harbor provisions, I think it's helpful to show that there's some actual proof in the pudding that you've actually done the work and you're actually maintaining these policies on an ongoing basis. Another challenge we run into is segregation of duties, particularly with smaller enterprises. And that's not something, it's a control concept that is difficult to get your arms around. And it's easier for larger organizations. But I would caution you all just to think about segregation of duties, because if it's not in place, you're allowing people to circumvent controls and maybe take advantage of these policies and go around them for personal gain, whether it's for employees or service providers or external parties. Jesus, any other examples you have in mind?
Yeah, I have one. A couple years ago, one of our audit clients was asked, do we have backups? And they said no. So we had to list that out as a finding that we had. The next year we came back and they said we fixed it. We have backups now. What they did is they got a tool that is targeted for individuals, not commercials, install on their server, and they were making copies of the data, like the core data, into an external hard drive that was connected to the main server. So in theory, they were saying they had backups, and yes, they were having backups, but that was not the design the backups are meant to be done, because the device was connected to the hardware. Now, giving them credit, what they did is they protected the data against mechanical failures of that server. So if the server would have like any sort of issue, they have a copy of the data. Unfortunately for them, later on, we didn't let them pass by that. By the way, we said, well, that's a copy of your data, but it's not really backup. So we then the following year when we came back, we asked him, did you had any major events? They're like, yeah, we got ransomware, and we were done. We actually had to pay because we got everything got ransomware, even the hard drive that had the backup. So just because you have a check, quote unquote, backup procedure doesn't mean it might be robust enough. They paid the ransomware. Fortunately for them, they were able to get their data back, and then they were able to recover. And then they set up cloud backups with immutable storage. Immutable means that they cannot be changed. So a quick lesson learned for us to share with you guys. Just because you have a checkbox passing doesn't mean that it's properly designed.
I couldn't agree more, Jesus. In the last year, I've seen a issue with a backup protocol that the backup was actually pointing to the wrong drive image. And this was only discovered once data was corrupted. And thankfully, the MSSP rather, was able to recover the data. But a simple error in configuration, if you don't check it, can have these detrimental results. And taking the time to just go and look, manually set eyes on a backup, verify the volume, it's a small step. But again, fortunately, we have found solutions to a lot of these problems, right? What I see a lot in my experience is in trying to force adoption, companies shortcut this and use a program like KnowBe4, which statistically doesn't demonstrate much success. Particularly when it's done on a quarterly and an annual basis. What I've seen work in adoption, and this traces from data recovery all the way through to cybersecurity mechanisms, is pairing up a technical person with a non-technical person that can act as this champion for your company. Have you seen success? I've recently, in the last year, started experimenting with gamifying these processes, providing rewards to reporters and even campaigns like Fish the Boss, where management and executives are they're supported in their role, and they get the benefit and they get the good feelings when they see this being implemented. But for employees who are just trying to get through the day, this kind of ongoing training where it's not just online, but you have this champion who on like a monthly basis just takes 15 minutes to describe something new that they've learned or something that's happening in the industry. It seems to tie in the request that we have and really the need for leadership to model the behavior to the results oriented process that we're looking at. Have you had any experience with what makes a good champion in an organization? Have you seen those people be effective in the past?
So I've seen the gamified learning solutions. I think it was called Wombat, but it got bought by Proofpoint, so I don't know what they're called. Those are really popular to get people's attention. The reality is that some learning solutions, like KnowBe4, they're dry material, so people might tune them out. But even with tools like KnowBe4, you can use them to test your folks. Like we at WillyPen, the IT is trying to catch us with test emails from the phishing module, and they get really creative. They have fun with it. Now, I haven't fallen for them yet, knock on wood, but they've told me we're going after you, and they've sent some really creative messages like your Amazon is delayed or stuff like that. But the type of the learning that we're getting is targeted to our culture, and that's what makes the difference. Yes,
Yep.
if you compare a PowerPoint to a gamified, definitely the gamified is the best way to go. But if you do training that is more targeted to the company, it'll be more interesting for the audience.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I hope our presentation has been helpful. Thank you again, John and Jesus, for the knowledge and experience you've shared with us. We'll endeavor to provide prompt responses to anyone's questions via email or through the Teams. After the presentation, please also keep an eye out for the step-by-step handout, which is also going to be available on our websites and contain a checklist that we've kind of discussed to help guide you in the initial stages and give you an overview of the implementation of control group IG1, who in your company should own each task, and guidance on where to go from there, so that you leave with the start of a plan and not just theory. So again, thank you again, John and Jesus. Thank you all for joining us. We've appreciated your time today.